Hi, I'm Joan. My grandpa traveled a long way, 6 hours by plane, just to see my brother walk down the aisle. But when he got there, my mom had him sit near the trash cans. She sneered, "That old man will embarrass us." When I spoke up, she slapped me and kicked me out of the wedding. 20 minutes later, his private jet landed. What happened next surprised everyone. Want to guess who owned that grand estate? I arrived at Mark's wedding in a simple green dress I'd found in a small shop in Willow Creek. It was soft and comfortable, one of the few things that still felt like me. The sun in the Golden Valley was bright, making long shadows on the stone path to the estate. The air smelled of fresh flowers and roasted chicken. Champagne was everywhere. People were sipping it, but no one offered me any. Guests wore fancy clothes, looking like they belonged. I caught my reflection in a glass door. Messy hair, no makeup, freckles showing. I looked like I was there by mistake. My mom saw me from across the patio. She walked over slowly, her lips tight, her eyes narrow, like she was checking for damage. "You look," she paused, her eyes going from my shoes to my neck. "Decent." That was all. No hug, no welcome. She didn't even care that I came alone. She quickly walked off to greet someone with a fancier dress and more money. Mark didn't see me, or he pretended not to. He was laughing with his old friends by the oak trees, holding a drink, his arm around his future wife, Sarah. Her white lace dress looked more expensive than my whole college education. When her eyes met mine, she just looked politely uninterested. We had only met twice. I walked around the edge of the party, pretending to look for someone. I hadn't come to cause trouble. I came because, despite everything, they were still my family. Then I saw Grandpa Arthur. A black car slowly pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped Grandpa Arthur, a bit bent but still strong, wearing a dark blue suit he probably hadn't worn since Grandma Rose's funeral. His tie was crooked, his hands spotted, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Joan," he whispered, his voice weak but clear, "you're the only one worth flying for." I hugged him tightly, breathing in the faint smell of his aftershave and mints. He had flown 6 hours at 82 years old for this. No one else seemed to care. No one even walked over to him. I offered to help him find his seat. A staff member quickly led us to the far side of the patio, past the flower arch, past the pond, around the outdoor kitchen. And there it was, one plastic chair squeezed between two overflowing trash cans next to the noisy heat vents from the food tent. My chest felt tight. There had to be a mistake. The staffer just shrugged, checked a list, and left. I turned to my mother, who was standing nearby, adjusting her bracelet in the sun. "Why is Grandpa sitting there?" I asked. She looked past me as if I were just background noise. "He insisted on coming. I told him he wouldn't enjoy himself. Beggars can't be choosers." "He's not a beggar," I said, my voice low but firm. She leaned closer, her whisper sharp. "That old man will embarrass us. The way he talks, the way he eats, the way he smells." "You're serious?" I looked at her, really looked. Her face was tight, cold. She wasn't even pretending. I walked away, my hands clenched, but it wasn't over for me. As guests started to sit for the dinner, I stood up from the table where I'd been placed, next to the valet's son. Yes, really. I walked onto the small stage near the entrance arch. "Excuse me," I said, gently tapping a fork against my glass. Conversation stopped. Dozens of faces turned to me. "I just wanted to ask." My voice trembled. I took a deep breath. "Why is my grandfather seated near the trash bins while strangers are at the family table?" There was a long silence, then the sharp click of heels. My mother stormed up the aisle, her hand raised before I could even see it. The slap hit my face like a loud crack. Gasps rose from the crowd. "You ungrateful thing," she hissed, her cheeks red. "You don't belong here." She turned to a staff member. "Escort her out." I stumbled back, my cheek burning. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded and started walking. my heels catching in the gravel, my dress dragging on the dusty path. Mark looked away. My father straightened his collar and pretended to read the wine list. But Grandpa stood up. He didn't say a word. He just met me halfway as I reached the edge of the patio, slipped something into my hand, and pressed my fingers around it. A green silk handkerchief, frayed at the corners, with a faded silver J stitched on it. I held on to it. I kept walking until I reached the parking area, then sat on a low stone wall under the shade of an olive tree. The handkerchief lay in my palm like a promise I didn't yet understand. My heart didn't break. It had already done that years ago. This was just proof. They had shown me again exactly who they were. As guests started to sit for the dinner, I stood up from the table where I'd been placed, next to the valet's son. Yes, really. I walked onto the small stage near the entrance arch. "Excuse me," I said, gently tapping a fork against my glass. Conversation stopped. Dozens of faces turned to me. I just wanted to ask. My voice trembled. I took a deep breath. Why is my grandfather seated near the trash bins while strangers are at the family table? There was a long silence, then the sharp click of heels. My mother stormed up the aisle, her hand raised before I could even see it. The slap hit my face like a loud crack. Gasps rose from the crowd. "You ungrateful thing," she hissed, her cheeks red. "You don't belong here." She turned to a staff member. "Escort her out." I stumbled back, my cheek burning. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded and started walking, my heels catching in the gravel, my dress dragging on the dusty path. Mark looked away. My father straightened his collar and pretended to read the wine list. But Grandpa stood up. He didn't say a word. He just met me halfway as I reached the edge of the patio, slipped something into my hand, and pressed my fingers around it. A green silk handkerchief, frayed at the corners, with a faded silver J stitched on it. I held on to it. I kept walking until I reached the parking area, then sat on a low stone wall under the shade of an olive tree. The handkerchief lay in my palm like a promise I didn't yet understand. My heart didn't break. It had already done that years ago. This was just proof. They had shown me again exactly who they were. Then came a sound, louder than the music inside, a deep rumble, wheels, jet wheels. The sound was deeper, smoother, something heavy, moving slowly and surely down the gravel path just behind the estate. I turned toward the noise and squinted against the sun. A black luxury car glided into view, sleek as a shadow, its paint reflecting the golden late afternoon sky. Behind it, two smaller SUVs followed like a quiet parade. I stayed seated on the stone wall, my fingers wrapped tightly around Grandpa's handkerchief, not daring to hope. Then the driver's door opened. The chauffeur stepped out quickly and moved to the back passenger door. It opened smoothly, and there he was. Grandpa, not hunched and tired like he'd been an hour ago, but standing tall, composed. His dark suit was perfectly cut, his shoes gleaming, and he wore sunglasses, real ones, not the cheap kind he used to fumble for. Two men in dark suits followed him out, tall and serious, looking around like they knew something the rest of us didn't. He saw me, paused, and took off his sunglasses. "Well, sweetheart," he said, his voice clear and strong, "ready to shake things up?" I stood up slowly. The gravel under my heels shifted, but I didn't fall. Not this time. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart pounding. Grandpa just smiled, a tight, knowing smile, and tilted his head toward the main building. I noticed it then. The staff at the gate, 3 young men in black vests, had frozen. One whispered something to another. The tallest one reached for a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, then stopped. When Grandpa took a step forward, they didn't stop him. One even opened the side gate, the same gate I had just been pushed through, humiliated and discarded. Grandpa offered me his arm. "Let's see if your brother remembers who actually owns this land." I blinked at him. "Wait, what?" But he didn't explain. He just kept walking. The truth hit me like cold water. This place wasn't just an expensive venue they'd rented. No, we weren't guests here. We were home. Or at least Grandpa was. I fell in step behind him, still holding the green silk in my hand. The initials JH shimmered faintly in the sunlight. It didn't feel like just a gift anymore. It felt like a message. As we neared the reception area, music floated from the open patio. The crowd was in the middle of a toast. My mother's voice was loud, amplified, and proud, praising Mark's vision and ambition. The words made my stomach twist. Grandpa didn't flinch. The two men with him stepped slightly ahead, standing on either side of the wooden entry as the doors swung open. I paused at the edge, staying low behind a hedge of potted olive trees, watching. Heads turned, dozens of them. Then silence. Not the polite kind, but thick, awkward, disbelieving, the kind that fills a room and squeezes. Mark lowered his champagne glass mid-sip. My father went completely white. My mother froze mid-sentence, her hand still holding the mic. Grandpa walked straight through the crowd like he was parting the sea. Eyes didn't just follow. They stared in disbelief, like they were trying to understand and couldn't. He stepped up to the small stage beside the string quartet, gently took the microphone from my mother's hand without a word. She didn't fight him. She just stepped back and blinked at him like he wasn't real. I wasn't going to say anything, Grandpa began, his voice calm but heavy. Didn't want to make a fuss. It's a wedding after all. There were small, nervous laughs. But maybe, he continued, it's time people knew what really built this family. From where I stood, I saw my father's hand twitch toward his pocket. Mark stared at his shoes. Sarah's parents looked at each other, clearly confused. The staff had stopped moving completely. I walked in then, not down the aisle, not toward the family table, just through the side entrance, quiet and steady, and stood near the stone pillar by the reception arch. I didn't need to speak. I didn't want to. I just watched. One of the security men stood near me, giving a slight nod like I belonged there. I reached into my pocket, ran my fingers along the threads of the handkerchief again. For the first time that day, I didn't feel small. Grandpa kept going. "I'm 82, he said plainly. "I built this estate with these hands. I named it after my late wife, Rose. I gave it to the family, trusted it would be used for something good." He turned slightly, his eyes sweeping over the stunned guests. "But when I flew here today, no one knew, because no one bothered to ask if I'd be invited. I wasn't. My name wasn't on the list. The driver didn't even recognize me at the gate." There was a shift in the crowd, small gasps, murmurs. "I sat near the trash bins," he said dryly, "right next to the kitchen vent. Now, I'm not much for fanfare, but I know the difference between a seat and a message." He turned toward my parents, and I received the message loud and clear. The silence was crushing now. My mother clutched the back of a chair, her fingers white. My father stared at the floor. Mark still hadn't moved. I stood still. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. That moment wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about fairness. It was truth, spoken plainly. And then Grandpa said 7 words that made the whole room stop breathing. The air inside that glass-ceilinged hall grew thick in a way no summer afternoon should. Grandpa's voice cut through the murmurs like a slow knife through silk. "I built this empire for her, not you." For a moment there was only silence, an eerie, breathless kind. Then gasps. Then forks clinked against plates as hands trembled. Even the pianist stopped mid-note. I felt every eye shift toward me as I stood near the back of the room, no longer in the shadows. I hadn't moved closer on purpose, just instinct. But now I stood there, not hiding anymore. Grandpa lifted a hand and pointed. "Her," he said again. Sarah leaned into her friend and whispered, "Who is she?" The photographer, who'd just been snapping pictures of the champagne toast, lowered his camera slowly, like even the lens had gone blurry with confusion. I heard my own breath before I realized I was holding it. The green handkerchief in my palm felt like it held me to the floor. Grandpa took another step forward. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at my father square in the eye. I left the land in her name because she was the only one who visited me when I was sick. You remember, don't you, David?" Dad's face lost its fake glow. That polished, charming smile he always wore at events like this, gone. He looked like a man whose stage lights had just gone out. "You changed the forms," Grandpa continued, "didn't you, while I was still getting better?" My chest tightened. The memory hit before I could stop it. The winter 3 years ago, the pneumonia scare. Everyone else was too busy or traveling. I was the one who drove up through icy roads and sat with him in that cold cabin. I brought soup, I read aloud, I took his calls in the middle of the night when his breathing scared him. And then silence. After a few weeks, his number stopped ringing. I thought he had recovered and pulled back. My mother whispered something to Mark. Her lips barely moved. Grandpa raised a hand sharply. "Don't, not today." The entire room had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes you painfully aware of the smallest sound. Someone's bracelet slid down their wrist with a soft jingle. A baby cried faintly outside, but inside, it was just truth hanging thick in the air. Then Grandpa reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He turned, walked toward me, and offered it with steady fingers. I stepped forward, meeting him halfway. "This is yours," he said, handing me the envelope. It always was. My fingers shook as I took it, but I didn't open it. I just stared at the heavy, cream-colored paper, sealed, notarized, dated. "He changed that will," Mark blurted suddenly, stepping forward with his hands slightly raised like he was trying to calm a riot. "Whatever that is, it's not legal." "He changed it months later." One of our uncles, Mom's cousin, I think, stood from his table and asked, "Is that true?" I finally looked at the envelope. The date printed clearly across the top was 2 months before Grandpa's illness, before the pneumonia, before the silence. Grandpa's voice rose, not loud, but powerful in its weight. "You told the lawyer I was mentally unfit. You forged the medical paper while I was sedated. You used my hospital stay as cover." Then he slammed his cane down on a nearby table. The sharp crack made several guests jump. "You stole it. Not from me, from her." I felt heat rush up my neck. My father said nothing. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Mark stared at his shoes like they might offer an escape. And then I understood. The phone calls that stopped. The silence. The sudden change in how my family acted. They'd gone quiet, not because Grandpa had pushed me away, but because they had, because they cut off his voice and mine at the same time. I didn't cry, but my hands kept trembling. People began to stir. One woman in a blue dress whispered, "This is turning ugly." Another said softly, "I saw that girl with Mr. Arthur at the farmer's market last fall. He held her hand like a daughter." Mark stepped forward, trying to get the attention again. "Look, this isn't the time or the place." "Yes," I said for the first time. "Yes, it is." My voice didn't tremble. I didn't shout. I just said it like a fact. "You threw me out, remember? You told me I didn't belong here. You said Grandpa was embarrassing. You all sat him behind the trash bins like he was disposable. And now you're worried about timing?" The silence that followed was different this time. No longer shocked, just exposed. Grandpa stepped up to the stage, walked straight to the officiant, and leaned toward the mic. He looked out at the crowd, not a hint of apology in his eyes, only resolve. And like someone who'd waited years for the right moment, then he said, "Cancel the wedding. This family needs a reckoning first." The officiant's hands trembled as he slowly closed the leather-bound book in front of him. You could hear the pages settle the way still water does after a stone is thrown in. He glanced nervously at Grandpa, who stood just feet away, still gripping his cane like it was the only thing holding him to the room. "Are you absolutely certain, sir?" the officiant asked, his voice shaky. Grandpa gave a single heavy nod. "There will be no vows today. This family is about to split down the middle, and no one makes promises while standing on broken ground." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. "What? "What is happening?" she choked out, mascara already streaking beneath her eyes. Mark didn't move. His face was locked in something between disbelief and dread. Around the room, guests began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Dresses rustled, chairs squeaked, and for a moment, no one said a word. Me? I stood motionless, my arms stiff at my sides, like I was watching a slow-motion fire tear through a home I used to live in. And that's when Grandpa spoke again, louder this time, to the crowd. Some of you may have heard whispers. I'll speak plainly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim folder, worn but purposeful. After my medical records were mysteriously sealed, he said, I hired someone, a private investigator, and he found more than I ever expected. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He walked over to a small table near the center of the room and laid out a series of photographs, documents, and what made everyone lean forward, printed screenshots. These, he said, tapping one image, are surveillance stills taken just after midnight 3 months ago. Everyone strained to see. One image was of my father, David, entering a building that looked like a legal office. Another showed him again, same place, different night. Next to those was a copy of a paper supposedly signed by Grandpa, saying he was mentally unfit to manage the estate. The signature was shaky, loose, not at all like Grandpa's steady handwriting I'd seen all my life on birthday cards and checkbooks. A gasp shot out from somewhere behind me, then another. And then I turned toward Mark. His eyes met mine and dropped immediately. "You knew?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted his weight as if the floor had suddenly gone unstable beneath him. I didn't want to go along with it," he said. "Mom said it was just temporary, just until Grandpa, I didn't move. He took a step forward, trying to close the space between us. "I didn't know they'd cut you out completely. I swear, Joan, I didn't know they'd go that far." Grandpa's voice cut through the room like a sharp knife. "And yet, you were the first one to lock her out of the estate. You changed the security codes. You barred her from the harvest celebration. You watched her name get erased, and you said nothing." Mark looked like he'd been slapped. Behind me, one of the bridesmaids slipped off her heels and muttered, "I didn't sign up for this circus." To the right, Sarah's father motioned to an attendant. "Bring the car around. We're done here." The room was falling apart fast. Sarah sobbed into her hands. Her veil drooped down her back like a flag at half-mast. Her mother kept glancing from Grandpa to the documents, then back to her husband. The tension was thick enough to chew. And me? I just stood there. The sting from Mom's slap earlier still echoed on my cheek, a phantom burn I couldn't ignore. But I refused to touch it. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. She was watching me now, glaring as if daring me to speak again. And I did. "You told me I didn't belong here," I said, turning to face her fully. "You made it clear. Every birthday I wasn't invited to, every holiday dinner where my chair was mysteriously missing, every time you called me ungrateful because I didn't give you money for Mark's wedding," she hissed. "You still don't belong. You never did." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I used to believe that," I said quietly. "I used to think I was the black sheep, the disappointment, the outsider. But now, I see clearly. I was never the embarrassment. You." A few people clutched their pearls, literal pearls. One uncle turned and walked out. A distant cousin near the cake table grabbed her purse like it might shield her from whatever came next. Mark didn't move. Sarah crumbled into a chair, shaking. My father clenched his jaw and looked away. And then, through the silence, Grandpa reached into another inside pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped toward me. His eyes, fierce, tired, proud, met mine. He extended a folded paper, thick, cream-colored, with a seal. "I never stopped believing in you," he said, his voice low but firm. "And they won't erase you again." I looked down. It was the deed to the estate, My name was printed right on top. Grandpa's hand stayed in the air just a second longer than expected before the deed landed gently in my lap. The paper wasn't perfect. Edges curled, a faint coffee ring in one corner, but the signature, bold and unmistakably his, stared up at me like a secret that had waited too long in the dark. I didn't say anything at first. My fingers touched the ink slowly, then curled around the edges like I wasn't sure if I should protect it or tear it in half. Grandpa sat beside me on the long leather sofa, his posture straighter than I'd seen in years. He looked tired, not from age, but from something deeper, like a man who had kept too much buried for too long. "You checked the signature twice," he said quietly. "It's real." I nodded. "I know it is. That's not what's hard to believe." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I made the change the day I saw your mother throw out your college admission letter. Sterling University, wasn't it?" I blinked. I hadn't thought about that day in years. "You saw that?" "She told the housekeeper it was junk mail," he murmured. But I recognized the envelope, and I recognized her face when she tossed it. That was the moment I knew something had gone very wrong. I tried to form words, but the air in my chest refused to move. All I could get out was, "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to," he said, "but I thought protecting you quietly was better than putting you in the middle of a war. Turns out I underestimated just how far they'd go." The room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall and the occasional shift of the firewood in the fireplace. Outside the large window, the estate's nightlights dotted the slope like scattered lanterns. He leaned back, fingers clasped on his knee. "I entrusted a lawyer in the city to hold everything until your 30th birthday. That was the plan. But I never got anything because your mother intercepted it." His voice dipped. "She forged a medical power of attorney 6 months ago, told the court I was declining, claimed early dementia. It let her override every legal instruction I had left." I stared at him, stunned. "She filed the paperwork with your uncle's notary and sealed it with a doctor's note from her friend, someone who hasn't examined me in 10 years. So even this deed, technically legal when I signed it, but with the POA in place, it was voided in practice. They had the upper hand. They just didn't count on me showing up today." I rubbed my temples. This whole time, I thought I was just disappointing them. Not enough. Not successful like Mark. Not worth fighting for. "You weren't the failure, Joan. You were the threat." The words landed hard. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the fireplace. Every meeting where Mark cut me off mid-sentence, every time Mom said I was too sensitive, every holiday where I ended up in the kitchen doing dishes alone while they toasted to each other's accomplishments, I felt something rising in my throat. Not quite a sob, not quite anger. It was something quieter, something heavier. "I wanted to believe family still meant something," I whispered, "even when it hurt." Grandpa looked at me with the same expression he wore when I was a kid and fell off my bike but tried not to cry. "Family does mean something," he said, "but not all blood is worthy of the word." Silence stretched between us. My hands tightened around the deed. "What's the point of owning something they already poisoned?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "Every inch of that estate is soaked in their contempt. I'd rather burn it down." He didn't flinch. "You could," or he reached forward, placed a wrinkled hand over mine. "You could unpoison it with truth." I sat back, letting his words settle like dust in the room. Truth. What a strange, powerful thing. It doesn't erase pain. It just demands you stop pretending it didn't happen. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat still with that paper in my lap and the quiet hum of memories pressing in on me. Eventually, I stood and walked over to the corner bookshelf. I pulled down a folder, one I hadn't touched since college. Inside were pages of notes, sketches, plans, an estate redesign I once dreamed of. I'd forgotten it was even here. "I used to imagine creating a label that honored Grandma Rose's name," I said, flipping through the pages. "Simple, clean, authentic, just like her. She taught me how to care for the land before I learned how to drive. Grandpa's eyes lit up with something fierce and gentle all at once. Then that's what we'll do. Start there and take it all back. My hand stopped on a sketch of a label, Rose's Legacy, in soft script across a bottle. I smiled faintly, and for a brief moment there was peace in the room. Not because the pain was gone, but because for the first time in years, the truth had a place to sit. But that peace didn't last, because while I was tracing the outline of a dream I thought I'd buried, my mother was already setting her next move in motion, one that would make everything I held in my hands feel like kindling, waiting for a match. The crumpled deed still sat on my nightstand when the phone rang, one shrill vibration in the quiet of the early morning hours. I blinked at the screen. Leo. My stomach clenched. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since he left the estate quietly after Mark reorganized the staff. The call wasn't long. "You need to come now," Leo said. His voice was hushed, urgent. "They're about to dump everything." I didn't ask what he meant. I just grabbed my jacket, my car keys, and the portable voice recorder Grandpa had handed me earlier. "In case they try to bury more than your name," he'd said, with eyes that hadn't blinked since dinner. He wanted to come, but the evening had taken too much out of him. "Record everything," he whispered. "Don't let them erase her again." By the time I reached the gates of the estate, the stars had started to fade. The gravel cracked under my tires as I pulled up to the back entrance of the facility. The main lights were off, but a sliver of yellow glowed beneath the side door. Leo stood there, gray hoodie, ball cap low. His hands were trembling. "They're moving fast," he muttered, sliding a key card through the side panel. "Follow me and stay quiet." We slipped through narrow corridors lined with crates and forgotten barrels, ducking past a small office where the computer monitor still blinked. Then he stopped. Pinned to the bulletin board was a laminated sheet. "Emergency cleaning protocol, approved by M. Davis," my mother's signature. "She put it up last week," Leo said. "I thought it was just a formality, but tonight?" He opened the door to the processing chamber. I stepped inside, and the air hit like ammonia, a sharp chemical smell. A thin foam clung to the edges of 3 massive steel tanks. One of them hissed. I instinctively pulled my sleeve over my nose. "What is that?" I asked, backing up. "Solvent," Leo whispered. "Industrial grade, not just for cleaning. Someone poured it into the tanks." My stomach twisted. "This batch, was it the Golden Harvest?" He nodded once. "The last one your grandmother ever helped blend." I staggered back, hand on the wall. The sting in my eyes wasn't just the fumes. Leo reached into his hoodie and pulled out a USB stick. I copied the security footage before they could wipe it. Mark came in after hours, twice, and he wasn't alone. I stared at the little drive in his palm. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because he offered me $10,000 to say it was an accident." I froze. "And you refused?" He hesitated. "I took the money and told you instead, because you're the only one who ever treated this place like more than a trophy." Something cracked in my chest, not loudly, but the kind of snap you feel behind your ribs, like a rope pulled too tight for too long. I turned and walked up to the tank. A dull silver beast, stained now with betrayal. My reflection warped across its surface. "She spent her last summer blending this," I whispered. "Every night she'd come in with her tasting book, said she wanted one last vintage, something to outlive her." Leo said nothing. He didn't have to. They hadn't just tried to ruin the wine. They'd tried to erase her. I took out my phone and began photographing everything. The foam, the tank labels, the posted protocol. Leo handed me a bottle he'd managed to seal from an untouched batch. "You'll need this for testing." I nodded. My fingers shook as I dropped the USB into my purse. Then I drove. I didn't go straight back. I couldn't. The road stretched ahead, headlights cutting through the darkness. At a bend past the county line, I pulled over. There was a turnout near an old apple orchard. I stepped out of the car, left the door open. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. The sky was starting to change, inky blue, bleeding into a faint strip of pink dawn. And I stood there, frozen in the half-light, hugging myself. If I expose this, I said aloud, my voice raw, I destroy the family name. My own breath fogged in the air. But if I stay quiet, she dies a second time. I closed my eyes and saw her. Grandma rose, leaning over a barrel, brushing hair from her face, smiling at me with purple-stained fingers. She once told me, "It keeps who we are if we protect it." I didn't cry. I just got back in the car, pulled out my old contacts list, and tapped the name of a chemist I'd worked with on a college lab project in Riverton. When she picked up, I spoke clearly. I need a rush analysis. Industrial solvent, possibly methyl ethyl ketone. She said she'd meet me in 2 hours. I ended the call. The sky behind me had gone from lavender to gold, light rising, but my chest felt heavier than ever, somewhere between rage and grief. I finally stopped asking for their love. I drove the rest of the way in silence, the sunrise barely warming the frost behind my eyes. My fingers clenched the steering wheel like it might hold me together. By the time I reached the estate's main office, the parking lot was half full. Sleek black cars lined up like they were here for a funeral. In a way, they were. The boardroom was tucked behind thick oak doors at the back of the main building. I didn't knock. I walked in mid-sentence. Mark was speaking, his hands moving like a salesman trying to turn a disaster into an opportunity. He stopped. Everyone stopped. I didn't say a word. I placed the bottle of Grandma's poisoned wine right in the middle of the table. Then the flash drive. A few people exchanged glances. My mother didn't bother to hide her disgust. "You don't belong here," she said coldly. "You were removed from the board." I didn't even blink. I walked to the built-in projector and plugged in the drive. The screen on the wall flickered. Footage began to play. Mark entering the processing wing after hours, looking over his shoulder, then the timestamp, then the moment he poured something into the tank, frame by frame, crystal clear. No one spoke, not until Leo appeared at the door. "She's telling the truth," he said, his voice low but steady. "He paid me to stay quiet. I gave the money to charity, and I brought her here instead." Mark stood up, his face flushed. "This is a setup, a family vendetta." "Sit down," a legal officer said, one of the shareholders, a quiet man from Golden Valley I barely knew. "This footage, if verified, qualifies as intentional product sabotage. That's felony-level misconduct. And if your name's on that safety override protocol," he turned to my mother, I didn't need to say a thing. The camera cut to a photo I'd snapped of the emergency protocol. Her signature was stamped across the bottom. "This wine," I finally said, my voice catching, "was the last blend Grandma helped craft before she passed. You didn't just ruin a product. You defiled her memory." My father's voice cracked through the silence. "You'll destroy us all, Joan. Think about what you're doing." "I am," I said. "I thought about it all night." The door creaked again. This time it was Grandpa. He moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but his gaze sharp as ever. He didn't speak at first, just handed a thick envelope to the attorney trailing behind him. "About a year ago," Grandpa said, "I revised the family trust." Whispers rippled across the room. My mother stiffened. Mark looked like someone had slapped him across the mouth. "I no longer trust this board," Grandpa said plainly. "Too much ego, too little legacy." The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the envelope. "Effective immediately, Joan Harper holds full power of attorney over all family operations. The land, the winery, and associated assets are secured under a separate estate trust under her name." My breath caught. Grandpa turned to my mother, his tone almost gentle. "You disowned your daughter out of pride. You called her a burden, an embarrassment. But now it's her name that saves you from collapse." Mark shoved back his chair and stormed out. No one tried to stop him. He slammed the door so hard the projector flickered. My mother just sat there, blinking rapidly. We were protecting the brand," she murmured. "No," I said quietly. "You were protecting your ego, and you were willing to burn everything to the ground just to keep control." She looked at me then, not with love, not even hate, just confusion, like I was someone she didn't recognize anymore. but I wasn't the one who changed. After the boardroom emptied, I stood there a moment longer, just me and the silence. The storm had passed, but its aftertaste still lingered in the corners of my mouth, bitter and dry. I gathered the wine bottle, illegal documents, and my grandmother's folded estate sketch that Leo had handed me, like a quiet offering. My fingers brushed the edges gently, and I held it to my chest as I stepped outside. The evening light stretched long over the hills, turning the trees into shadows that swayed with the breeze. There was something special about that time of day, when the sun dipped low but hadn't quite gone. The kind of quiet that invited reflection, not conversation. I didn't head to the house. My legs moved on their own, following the path that curved behind the processing barn and led to the lower garden. Her garden. No one went there anymore. The gravel crunched under my boots as I reached the bench, where she used to hum while tending to her plants. I could almost smell the citrus from her soap, feel her calloused fingers guiding mine when I was little and didn't know the difference between a strong bud and a lost cause. That place hadn't changed much, but I had. I crouched beside the old rose bush where she always kept her small wooden crate. Back then, it held gardening gloves, twine, and those strange lozenges she claimed helped her sing better. The soil was dry, cracked. I ran my hands through it anyway, just to feel closer to her. That's when I saw something poking out. Metal, dulled with age. My breath caught. I dug carefully, dusting dirt away from the edges, until I uncovered a rusted tin box. It wasn't locked, just latched. My fingers hesitated before flipping it open. Inside, a folded envelope wrapped in linen cloth and a single dried rose petal, its stem brittle but still shaped like a tiny outstretched hand. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. To Joan. My throat tightened. I opened the envelope slowly, the linen crinkled like fabric that hadn't seen light in years. Her handwriting curved across the page with that same steady grace, the kind only a woman who sang to plants and outlasted betrayal could possess. If you're reading this, then you already know the truth. I blinked back the heat rising behind my eyes. They never saw your strength, child, but I did. I saw it when you bandaged birds, when you gave away your share of pie to Sarah, when you let your mother's silence define your self-worth just so peace could last one more dinner. You always gave more than you were given. That's your power, but don't let them define your worth. I pressed the letter against my chest. I could hear her in the silence. Not her words, but her spirit. Not preaching, not warning, just holding space for me. This land doesn't belong to the loudest. It belongs to the one who knows how to love it back. I folded the letter, not with grief, but with something steadier, reverence maybe. I sat on the bench, watching the horizon, where dusk began to bleed into night. The wind stirred again, soft this time. The trees rustled like they were whispering among themselves. I tilted my head, and for a flicker of a second, I thought I heard her humming. Just a bar, maybe two, faint but real enough to steal my breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to ask for space here. I didn't feel like a visitor treading lightly. I felt home. I closed my eyes and let the quiet wrap around me. I'd been fighting so hard for justice, clawing back every inch of dignity they tried to take. But here, under these trees, with her voice still echoing in the air, I didn't have to fight. I could just be. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. I turned. Leo stood a few yards away, holding a lantern. He didn't say anything at first, just walked over and sat beside me, placing a rolled-up parchment on my lap. I opened it. Grandma Rose's original blueprint for the estate's expansion, hand-drawn, weathered at the corners, annotated in red ink with names of plant types and irrigation lines. She wanted this to grow, he said quietly, with you. I nodded slowly. Then I'll rebuild it, not out of spite, but out of love. The words came easy, not rehearsed, just honest. We sat there a little while longer. I asked him for a pencil and a notebook and began to mark spots where the new roses could run. Sloping rows near the ridge for herbs, a gazebo where the wildflowers used to bloom, and one small plot I drew a heart around and labeled Rose's Grace. By the time the first stars appeared, the air had cooled. The trees looked softer in the starlight, almost like they were waiting. As the first stars came out, I whispered to the trees, "Thank you for waiting." I stayed in the garden longer than I intended, my fingers brushing over the leaves like I was memorizing them. The quiet had changed. It didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt full, like something had returned. 3 weeks passed. The estate was no longer a forgotten place. It was alive. That evening, the garden glowed under paper lanterns strung from the oak trees. Tables were lined with white linen, and local cheeses and bread sat in rustic bowls. There were no photographers, no rehearsed speeches, just people who had helped. Old neighbors, a few loyal workers, friends of my grandmother. Even the mayor had shown up in casual clothes, carrying a bottle of local wine, older than I was. I wore a simple navy dress, but it was the rose brooch pinned over my heart that meant the most. It had been my grandmother's. Leo had found it in the back of her desk drawer, wrapped in a handkerchief with her initials. As I greeted guests, poured wine, and passed fresh rosemary bread, I tried to stay grounded. My hands moved, my smile stayed gentle, but inside I was holding my breath. Not from fear anymore, just disbelief. For the first time in years, something beautiful was unfolding, and no one was trying to take it from me. Until I saw them. My parents and my brother arrived as if the place still belonged to them. My mother wore beige, expensive, tight at the collar, and walked like she had an audience. My father didn't bother smiling, and Mark, in some stiff navy jacket that didn't fit right, looked at the property like he was calculating numbers in his head. I kept my shoulders back and offered a nod. "Joan," my mother said coolly as she passed by, "nice little gathering. Don't get too used to it." I said nothing. I wasn't here to argue. Not tonight. They mingled quietly, scanning the crowd, probably wondering who was worth impressing, but no one seemed interested in them. People stayed where they were, glasses in hand, chatting about the trees, asking about the new equipment I'd ordered, or complimenting the rosemary planting I'd done near the fence line. This was no longer their stage. A black SUV pulled into the gravel just as the sun dropped below the hills. People turned and the air shifted. It was Grandpa. Leo stepped forward to help him out of the car, but Grandpa waved him off with that same gruff determination I remembered from childhood. He walked slowly but with purpose, his cane tapping steadily on the path as he made his way through the garden. His suit was old but pressed. His hands were thinner, spotted now, but still strong. When he reached me, he paused just long enough to nod. I offered my arm. He took it. We walked together to the wooden platform we'd set up beside the gazebo. As Leo adjusted the mic, Grandpa cleared his throat, took the glass of wine I handed him, and raised it. "To the one," he said, his voice firm and deliberate, "who remembered what family is supposed to mean." A hush fell. Even the lanterns seemed to stop flickering. "This estate doesn't belong to me anymore," he continued, "and it hasn't for a while. It belongs to Joan, not because of her name, not because of blood, but because she remembered what it meant to love this land and the people who built it." My throat tightened. He wasn't done. "By my hand, by Rose's wish, and by the deeds Joan carried in silence, she is the rightful heir." The crowd gasped softly. From the side, I heard Mark scoff. "You can't do that," he barked, stepping forward like he'd just woken up from a nightmare. "This is a family estate. You can't just give it away." Grandpa didn't flinch. He turned slowly. "Watch me." My father opened his mouth, but before a single word left, a voice from the back spoke calmly. "I can